What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie 0232 here today for another Frosty Features. It's been a minute, but we're back working on the Extreme X-Men, and today we have Forge, the mechanical expert of the X-Men. So if you haven't seen a Frosty Features before, what this is a comic book background on the toons that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I am your nerdy, person who's gonna show you what that is. Yeah, that's gonna work. Typically we stick to Marvel 616 canon. This one's gonna jump a little bit all over the place, but that is okay. So, here we are. Let's get started. According to Scopely. So Scopely posts in the blog post when they come out with a new character on MarvelStrikeForce.com. They post on these blog posts and they will announce who the characters are, and they give a little ditty on who the person is. So in this case, we have Forge. Forge was born with the mutant ability to mentally create, manipulate, and control technological devices, making him an incredibly skilled inventor and engineer. He eventually joined the X-Men as their chief mechanic, where he designed and improved many of their iconic gadgets, such as cybernetic limbs, the Blackbird, and even the Danger Room. So we will rate this description after I give my description. This is Forge. Yeah. So, we're gonna go ahead and start off with the craziness, right? Unlike every other character in Frosty Features thus far, things get complicated with Forge right at the beginning. So, name. He is unnamed in canon. So, he was originally created by Romita Jr. and Claremont, and Chris Claremont originally intended to name him Daniel Lone Eagle, but it has never, to this recording date, Forge's name has never been released in comic book canon. So we're gonna say his name is Daniel Lone Eagle. In the blog post we read a second ago, the blog post description, it only refers to him as Forge. This is why. I didn't know this. I learned a lot about Forge in researching my stuff for Forge, because Forge essentially is the side character in everything, right? In many, many, many X-Men, X-Factor, and a bunch of other comic books, Forge is pretty much never the main character, and what he's namely, the way I was first introduced to him, and what he's mainly known for, is something kind of ridiculous we'll talk about a little later. But so his name, we've had so many side characters. They've been in like we've had characters that have been in like 4 whole comics, and they got a whole damn background as far as their names and stuff go. But essentially, we know nothing about any specific details on Forge's true origins, where he's from, his name, his parents, things like that. Not a thing, right? So, Daniel Lone Eagle, it's non-canon, but it was intended to be his name by the original creator. So, there's a big push online that is actually Forge's name. But it isn't. So, that's a nice little clue in on how this feature's gonna go. His first appearance was in X-Men, Uncanny X-Men number 184 in 1984. So, once again, we are almost at 40 years we've had Forge, and he doesn't have a name other than Forge. Cool. Powers / abilities. So Forge has perhaps one of the most interesting power sets in Marvel, in my opinion. He has mechanical perception, and unbeknownst to many people, he also is skilled in sorcery. And this is, so when we get into the power sets, most of the time it's how I decide to name the powers. Technopathy isn't correct for Forge. Some people say technopathy. So most of this Forge feature is going to be me debating the internet. It's not technopathy. He doesn't have full understanding or control of tech. He has mechanical perception. He essentially sees the world, he sees the universe in this kind of weird mechanical way, right? He sort of sees a map of everything. And so when he puts his mind to something, he can just build it. So with that, he it's sort of an inherent genius that a lot of people talk about. So he is extraordinarily intelligent. The problem is, because it's his mutation, because of how it works, essentially, let's put him, we got a little Forge, and we got little Tony Stark sitting in a room, and somebody's like, hey, I need you to build a black hole detector that can flip to a wormhole emitter, something, science, and I need you to do it right now. Tony Stark is more intelligent than Forge in pretty much every way. But given the same materials, same situation all the way across the board, Forge will put this device together first, and it will work first. Maybe better than Tony Stark's. Tony Stark's will take longer, and in the event that they built these in different rooms, there is a chance that if we just look at what the final product is, after many revisions, Tony's might be better. But even in the initial contest, right, they both build it, boom, they put it on the table, and somebody goes, all right, cool, nice job. Forge, you built it first. It works. Great. Tony's, yours works, but it took a long time. Tony, how does yours work? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Ultimate confidence, knows exactly what's going on. Forge, how does it work? I have no idea, but it works. Shut up. Right? So Forge, his mutant power makes him skip these essential steps that he uses to actually create anything. So he instinctively can put things together. So for him to, he is mechanically minded though, but because he builds things so fast and so it's just sort of a flow thing. He thinks of something and he knows how to build it. So could Forge build a better version of the Iron Man armor? Yes. All he'd have to do is see the Iron Man armor and be tasked with the idea, hey, build this better. He could take it apart. When he takes it apart, he can know all about it. But when he puts it together, he just puts it together. He doesn't even think about it. Which has its advantages because of speed, disadvantages because he doesn't necessarily know how it works the first time. So canonically, there's many times where he has to take apart his own inventions to understand how they work. So it's sort of this really interesting kind of thing, right? But because of the fact that it is this sort of instinctual thing, Forge is one of the most underrated X-Men ever, and could potentially be one of the strongest X-Men there are, because of how quickly he doesn't have to think of how to do something, he just does it, right? So think he has every ability of Tony Stark, but faster. He just doesn't necessarily understand it right away. So consider power levels here, right? We'll talk about power level later in the feature, but this is just sort of your introduction. So sorcery, we'll talk about that a little bit, but he has the ability to use some magic. Yeah, we'll talk about it. So aliases. So for the most part, this is another big point of contention and debate. Usually that stuff comes later. Forge is all up at the front. So with Forge, he's known as Forge. He doesn't have a name, right? And then if you look through the internet, there's a lot of contention, a lot of different opinions on the nicknames, and I tried to research. I've only ever known him as Forge, so I tried to research every single nickname that I found, and the only one I could find back up, like I could actually find in the comics, was Maker. So there is an alternate universe, and we will talk about the universe a little bit later, but he is in in Earth 61029, he is known as the Maker instead of Forge. And that's all I could find. So he does have another alias, but for the most part, he's a no duel. But alternate universes, he has a Maker. Some places online say Genesis. I couldn't find that. There's a few of them I just wasn't able to back up, so I didn't want to throw it out there. So other aliases, Maker, but Forge is Forge. Forge likes to be Forge, and Forge has been Forge for almost 40 years now. So, 40 years actually, and I just realized it's 2024. So I don't know what month it was released, but soon he'll be a 40-year-old. So that's exciting. Great. So aliases, Maker. All that to say, Maker. Affiliations. So he is he pretty much is involved in many versions of the X thing, right? So we find him mainly in the X-Men. He also runs with X Factor for a while. It'd be super nice to get that 5th in Marvel Strike Force, right? Just throw the tag on him, we'll deal with it. And we've got New Mutants. he is in the original incarnation of New Mutants and the original incarnation of Cable's X-Force when they are first kind of put together. They're actually made out of the New Mutants, which is kind of why Forge is kind of thrown in with them. But yes, so he essentially, if there's an X team, he's typically involved with it. He kind of moves all the way around. But like I said, as far as plot stuff is concerned, Forge is very much a side character, so you don't actually see him in his 40 years. He's in a lot, but the focus is almost never on Forge, right? Almost. Background. He is a Northern Cheyenne Native American, and he lives in Dallas, Texas. He's a Texan. I was checking through, I did a little bit of research on the Cheyenne tribe, and so they predominantly are within the Great Plains of the United States, which Dallas is on the border, so we can make a slight connection that maybe he was born in Dallas, Texas. It's a little south, a little east for the Cheyenne. They're very much in like Oklahoma and stuff. But there's a chance that that's where he was born, but that is where he lives in the comics as an adult, as he is, right? So I don't know if that's actually his place of origin, but that is where he lives. So that is that. Who died? You can't be a superhero or supervillain in Marvel without somebody dying, and in Forge's case, it was his squad in the Vietnam War. So, as I said before, Forge is a Cheyenne Native American, and he was essentially raised at first to be a form of a medicine man, and he had a disagreement with his mentor, Nas, and with that, he departs and he decides to join the U.S. Army, and he goes and fights in Vietnam. So while he's in Vietnam, with this, he kind of pushes away his heritage pretty hard right there at the beginning of his situation. He excels in his first tour of Vietnam, and he's offered to become a SHIELD agent. He turns it down, and he gets promoted to the rank of sergeant. It's a whole thing, and things are going really well for him. But he turns down SHIELD, and he goes back to Vietnam. So because he feels like he can be more useful there, with his tech challenges and stuff. So with his whole thing he pushes away sorcery. He embraces tech. That's a big part of him. But so in his second tour of Vietnam, all of his squad is killed by his enemy. So in this situation, he's alone and he's freaking out. So as they die, he collects their souls because, like I said, he's raised as a medicine man for the Cheyenne tribe. So he's taught sorcery, and from birth he is trained to fight a specific kind of trickster god thing, right? So he's actually quite powerful, but he pushes it away. So with this, he uses sorcery and he collects the souls of these 9 men that have died around him, and he tears open this portal, and he essentially summons a whole bunch of demons from a different universe, and all these demons come and kill his enemies. But then he realizes that he can't control the demons, and the very demon that he is supposed to be fighting against shows up. So in this situation, he calls in a B-52 bomber to do an airstrike on the area so that he can kill the demons, because he does not have the ability to do it on his own. So with that, the first spell he cast cost 9 human lives. The second thing he did was make a call that cost him an arm and a leg. So, with that, the bombing works 100%, but he loses his right arm and his right leg. So, for those of you watching, you may be asking yourself, okay, Frosty, why in the picture is it his left? It's because I mirrored that image. But he lost his right arm and right leg. Typically he's pointed the other way. So he loses his right arm and right leg, and then he sets to create himself cybernetic prosthetics, which he is able to just kind of put together pretty quickly and attach to himself. So part of Forge is a tech. He could have a tech tag, and it would make total sense. He might have a tech tag, so he is technically part cyborg. Which is kind of cool, and throughout the comics, he builds and rebuilds these, and he adds different upgrades and stuff to them. as he kind of moves forward through time. But yes, so he gets his cybernetic prosthetics after this situation in Vietnam, and the he killed the demons, but the main one he was worried about did actually slip through and shows up later. Due to the fact that when he uses magic, he finds out he kind of makes the assumption that anytime he uses magic, people die, so he doesn't use magic anymore. When Forge uses magic, it's very rare, but it does come up. But it's super rare, right? With all of this, he falls into a deep depression, and trigger warning, he has a suicide attempt. He is very depressive, and he fights with insanity due to many various things. Also, as a reminder, his perception of the world is quite different than anyone else's because of that sort of mechanical scape he sees in, which probably also adds to his kind of mental decline. So he has a whole situation where he goes entirely insane for a period of time. But, and this is one of the cool things, and it just shows how adaptable his mind is, Cable, our time traveling X-Force dude, super cool, super, space Jesus, mutant Jesus, he comes and he's like, okay, Forge is crazy, but Forge has such an interesting power. What if I present Forge's mind to him telepathically as a machine? What then? So then in doing so, Forge analyzes his own mind and is able to repair his own mind instinctually. So he can look at this map of his mind and automatically fix his own mental issues, which would be super nice for all of us if that was an ability we could do. But anyway, so Forge is able to get past his insanity by Cable's presentation of his own mind to him as essentially a mechanical schematic, which is super cool. I just thought that was such a cool little thing. So moving on, relationships. As I said, right, we don't know anything about Forge's birth and things like that. So we don't know who his parents are, whatever. He's born to the Cheyenne tribe. That's about as far as it goes. He has very notable ex-lovers. So I kept saying one of the things he's most known for, the way I was first introduced to Forge, and also what most people know Forge from, is that he is Storm's lover often, right? Like it's like him and Black Panther are kind of the people that most people associate with Storm. So yes, they had a very big love affair situation for a while. That's Aurora Monroe, who is Storm. Raven Darkholme, after him and Storm break up, he actually moves on to dating Raven Darkholme after working with her for a little while. That is Mystique, for those of you in the back. And then Nas is his shamanic mentor. It's pretty much the closest thing to a father figure he has, at least currently in canon. So he's important to bring up. Notable events. Adversary. So the story that we just told, Adversary is the demon in which Forge was born and raised to fight the adversary. He is trained as a medicine man, and the sorcery he is trained in specifically is to fight that of this. He's a trickster god, but a little bit scarier than Loki, but he doesn't show up as often as Loki. His quest, his ultimate quest is to kill the adversary. And so, as I spoke before, in his situation in Vietnam, he actually unwittingly releases the adversary onto Earth, right? So adversary is just kind of chilling around and doing stuff. So as he builds his cybernetic limbs, and he goes and he joins the X-Men, and things are super hunky-dory until, he starts dating Storm. And there's a whole thing there where so Tony Stark, so this is like the whole background, right? Tony Stark, it always comes back to Iron Man, right? Tony Stark stops, famously, even in the MCU, Tony Stark stops selling weapons to the United States government. Well, at that time, he walks away, but the United States government's like, nah, we're still going to get our weapons. We're going to hire this guy. So they hire Forge out of the U.S. military to start building weapons for them. So one of the things he builds is one to depower the dire wraiths, which for all intents and purposes are very similar to what we consider to be like the Skrulls. the Skrulls are still in. They're just very similar to the Skrulls. They're shapeshifters and they hide among us kind of thing, and then they're slowly taking over. So he is tasked to make a weapon that takes out the dire wraiths, and in the process of making a weapon it's a neutralizer to take out these dire wraiths, he makes one that takes out the powers of mutants, and in attempting to hit a dire wraith kind of situation, he hits Storm. That's important for what I'm about to talk about. So Storm is depowered. That's how they meet up. That's how they get in a relationship. She gets really mad at him because of when she finds out that he made that weapon. So with that, they become estranged, etc., whatever. Eventually, Storm goes to reconcile, and she goes to Eagle Plaza in Dallas, Texas, which is Forge's home, and she comes upon Nas, and Nas is like, yo, Forge is being controlled by this demon called Adversary, and he's up on this mountain, right? And he's trying to summon summon Adversary and all these demons to come and destroy the world. You need to go take him out. And Storm's like, yeah, that sounds like that's a thing that's happening. We should do that. So she goes up to this mountain and she's like, yo, demons, get out of my way. I'm Storm. She got her powers back by this point. And so she's wiping demons out because she's freaking Storm and she's awesome. And she's plowing through the hordes, whatever. She gets to the top of this mountain and she sees Forge up there, and Forge is he's doing this ritual, and she is like, oh man, that ritual looks bad. We need to stop that. And so she pulls out a knife and she's like, you're my ex-lover, but I'm about to stab the hell out of you. And she stabs him and he's like, oh, you ought not should have done that, Aurora. And I was like, what's wrong with you? I was trying to close this gate that I had left open, and Adversary was here, and I was trying to separate this demon world from our world, but you stabbed me. And then Nas shows up, so she's like, oh no, I think I done did a goof. And Nas shows up, and he's like, yo, I'm actually Adversary. No one saw that coming. And guess what? You're pretty dang close to that portal. Yeet! And he knocks them both into this parallel empty Earth. Where he's like, I'm going to start a new human race that I'm the god over, and you are Adam and Eve. You are going to be make progeny, whatever. Okay, bye. And seals them up, and they get stuck there. Right? So eventually, because of how things go, the X-Men are tipped off that this happened, and they go to save them, and they are able to pull them out of the Earth, or out of the parallel universe. And so as they pull him out of the universe, and Forge is like, the only way I can stop adversaries by casting the spell in which I use all these souls. So we need people to die. Oh, also Madeline Pryor is there for some reason. So X-Men plus Madeline Pryor are like, nah, we'll die for you. And Forge is like, great, no problem. So he uses their souls, and they turn into pure beings of energy. And he turns it into a Kamehameha blast. And he goes, chow, and he takes out Adversary, and he didn't actually, spoiler alert, he locks Adversary behind this gate, and this is a super strong gate, and Adversary's never supposed to be able to get out. He does. And the X-Men are dead, but oh, lo and behold, another subplot going on. There was a goddess Roma, and Roma was watching the situation, and she's like, the X-Men aren't gonna die. I brought them back to life. So their death is televised, and then they're secretly kind of covertly brought back to life. It's sort of the first time we see a full mass bring back to life. Nowadays in comics, especially with the X-Men, it's just like, yeah, we have the technology to bring people back to life. Not a big deal, right? But at the time, it was kind of a bigger deal. All of the X-Men sacrificed their lives, and they all come back. So no repercussions because comics. Adversary does eventually escape, but in doing so, Forge decides that he's going to make a weapon that will take care of Adversary and otherwise dimension him, if you will, and that works immediately in the future comics. So there's that, but that's really all we've seen of Adversary so far. But it is supposed to be sort of the antithesis of Forge. So. Hopefully we see him again. Hopefully Forge comes forward a little bit. So with that, we're going to talk about Nimrod. So with Nimrod is essentially the absolute peak of Sentinels, right? So Sentinels being these robots. I mean, we've talked about them a few times, but it gets super complicated. We see them in Days of Future Past. We see them in Age of Apocalypse. And in just regular X-Men canon. But essentially, these are robots that are programmed to find and capture / destroy mutants, right? As depending on where you're reading in comics. Nimrod essentially is the epitome of the perfect working Sentinel that is from the Days of Future Past timeline. So in Days of Future Past, a big important thing, especially for Nimrod, one of the big reasons why that whole situation got out of hand is not only, so the Sentinels originally are supposed to be tracking mutants. Well, as the Sentinels become sort of autonomous, they're like, oh, well, mutants are just the next evolution of humans, so we should also capture humans, which is why the whole situation is bad. Everybody gets enslaved, etc. And Nimrod is no different. So Nimrod's big thing is to capture / destroy all of these people. So another thing about Nimrod that you need to know is that Nimrod is Ultron on crack, right? You can't kill Ultron, you can't kill Nimrod. Same reason. Nimrod also will just put himself back together. So Nimrod is essentially this being who, in the event, if he fights Wolverine and he needs to make sure that Wolverine can't cut through him, Nimrod will simply think of Darwin, right? The X-Man. Nimrod will simply just be like, oh, you have adamantium claws? Boom, I'm made of adamantium. You can't do anything to me, right? So he can legitimately analyze the situation. If somebody attacks him, he can adapt himself so that won't hurt him anymore, right? It's the only way to really take him out is covertly or digitally, right? So with that, Nimrod is essentially a big bad that can be a big bad, like taking out, let's talk about Thanos level. If everybody wants to, everybody thinks about Thanos as like this kind of, Nimrod is easily Thanos level. So with that, all that, there is a storyline, and we're going to hop out of the 616 back into the 616 and all over the part. But Nimrod, so he's created by Mother Mold and Master Mold, and he's got all these things, but his origin kind of changes. And Nimrod, due to the fact that Days of Future Past takes place in a different timeline, I believe it's Earth 811. Days of Future Past is in Earth 811, but goes into 616, etc., right? And Days of Future Present, also 811, right? But they go to 616 and some other ones. Time travel makes Marvel hard, right? So Nimrod essentially follows this sort of time traveling situation. So with that, in Days of Future Past, we have a descendant of Scott Summers, Rachel Summers, and Kate Pryde. Kate Pryde gets killed by Nimrod, and Rachel Summers tries to go back to the 616 to warn people about what the future is going to happen, right? Nimrod tries to follow Rachel Summers and misshoots where Rachel's going by 20 years, which this has screwed him over. He does not have the ability to time travel, so he decides, he's like, well, how do I get the ability to time travel? I will find the Mutant Forge, right? So he goes and he seeks out the Mutant Forge. And since he missed by 20 years, he's in a different universe. So he goes they both go, Rachel and Nimrod leave from Earth 811. Rachel goes to 616, hi. And then Nimrod goes to Earth 61029, right? In this version, so he decides he's going to look for Forge. He finds out that Forge is known as the Maker. We found it, right? So he goes and finds the Maker, Forge, and he is married to Storm. And they're living their best life in Dallas, Texas. They got 2 beautiful kids, one named Nas after his mentor, and one named Aurora after their mom, which is cool. And so Nimrod's like, oh, what a beautiful family. He kills Storm immediately, just absolutely kills her in front of the kids and everything. And then he takes Aurora, the child, and is like, I'm going to kill this one next unless you make me a time machine. And Forge is like, all right, I'm going to make you a time machine. So you can leave what's left of my family alone. So under duress, Forge makes Nimrod a time machine, but because Forge, once again, inherent genius, Forge is like, well, because also think about it, right? Forge is the perfect person to fight Nimrod, right? And it's funny because Nimrod is so intelligent, so strong. I feel like anytime Nimrod's like, I'm going to go to Forge, that does not go well for Nimrod. Spoiler alert. So Forge is like, all right, I'll make you a time machine. I'll send you back in time, but also the programming in the time machine is going to mess you up. So he gets in the time machine and he tries to go back to where Rachel Summers goes, and he is successful, but the programming that Forge put inside the time machine takes at Nimrod offline, and he shows up and he is damaged, and he is unconscious for a robot. He's offline. He's off. He's a robot that has been turned off, right? And he's found by William Stryker. William Stryker being the big anti-mutant guy who, founded or funded things like Weapon X and things like that. He's like, oh, cool robot thing. I'm going to steal its data. So he takes the data off of it, and he uses that to kind of come off as a bit of a precog. He has this sort of front where he's like, oh, I can see the future, blah, 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 blah. And it's all just from using the knowledge stored within Nimrod. But eventually, because of course Nimrod goes back online. You mess with a robot enough, you'll hit the on button, right? So Nimrod goes back online, decimates the area, and he's like, but he's heavily damaged from what Forge did to him. But in this situation, he wakes up and he's like, Forge created me. He's pretty messed up in the head. He's like, I'm gonna find Forge, and I'm gonna have Forge fix me. So he goes to Forge, and he's like, you gotta fix me, Forge. And Forge is like, yeah, all right, we'll fix you. And he creates a new body for Nimrod to go into with the intent that he will be able to control it. So he takes Nimrod's programming. He's trying to essentially make a Nimrod that, instead of hunting mutants and things like that, its main goal is to protect humans and mutants, etc. Essentially, effectively turning Nimrod into a robot superhero. Think Vision on steroids. But the personality of Nimrod gets downloaded into this new chassis, and it turns out, even though Forge can control him a little bit at first, it doesn't stick, and he attacks Forge, and the X-Men show up. And another character that I have a lot of history with, but Surge from the new X-Men. So one of the first comic book experience I had, I would go to the grocery store and New X-Men was coming out, and my mom would buy me the comics from New X-Men, which had the Academy X-Men. So it had Surge, who is this really bad chick that has electrical powers, but she can't control them. So Forge creates her these gauntlets. So she has a bit of a relationship with Forge, and she sews up and she grabs Nimrod on the back of the head, and she's like, yeah, you're screwed. I do electricity, dude. And she goes, pew, pew, because that's the sound electricity makes. And Nimrod, she thinks he's knocked out of the time stream. He survives and goes back into time, but she and the X-Men, the new X-Men, save Forge at the time, and he just went back to his original timeline, and Nimrod lives on, right? And he's got a lot more to him. He's a really cool big bad. Hopefully we'll see him show up in Marvel Strike Force eventually. He could be a pretty interesting event situation, just kind of due to his nature. Once again, think of Ultron on a much higher level, right? But those are our notable events. Power level. On Marvel Strike Force, they don't care about power levels, but here on Frosty Features, we do. Now, the way that this works, if you are a multiversal threat, you are a threat to all of reality. Not just your reality, but all the realities. You can topple the multiverse at a whim. Universal means you are a threat to your universe. Perhaps you can then, after destroying your universe, you could hop over to another universe and destroy that one and take them out one by one like that. Cosmic means that you are a threat on a planetary scale. You can take out things like small planetary bodies all the way up to a solar system or small galaxy if pushed the right way, right? Nuclear means that you have power equal to that of a nuclear bomb, being able to level things like small cities up to a small planetary body, once again with enough effort. Super soldier means that you are beyond all capabilities of a human being in strength, etc. You can level things like brick walls, and once again with enough time, maybe a city block will be your victim. City means that you are a human trained to absolutely peak conditions that a human can be trained at. This is where we see a lot of our secret agents, our mercenaries, things like that. a lot of ninjas in Marvel. And then we have Greg. Greg's the undead Asgardian spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and alone, Greg can't do much. And due to undead Asgardian physiology, just because I like to say it, I equate Greg to a regular human guy named Greg, right? So theoretically, if I have a box full of fake flowers that have a bunch of sewing needles sticking out of them, I theoretically, given the correct persuasion, could fight and defeat Greg, and that's where it is. So, in the case of Forge, right? So, I've hinted at it, I've brought it up multiple times. Forge has the potential to be quite powerful, right? He's essentially limited to his imagination. Imagination in a small amount of time, he can take anything out. With that, especially recently, most notably, I think it was Dawn of X storyline, but just recently, we see that Forge kind of quickly throws together a black hole emitter. So being able to throw things like that together kind of at a whim easily puts him at a cosmic power level. It's been a while since we've had a cosmic power level. So it's a little tough because Forge can't just make that happen, but he can make the tool to make that happen so fast, right? And because he can do that, if you can buy Forge a little bit of time, he honestly could go all the way up to a universal or multiversal threat if pushed the right way. He has the potential to be essentially an omega level mutant, but he's not. He is an alpha level mutant because what he does is creates. He doesn't create from nothing, but he creates from what's around him. So Forge is, what we've seen of Forge, his potential is at cosmic, but due to, I mean, even the thing where he fixes his own mind from a mechanical mind map, right? The applications of his powers are so limitless that his power scales quite high. I'm not gonna say infinitely, but quite high, right? So on a just base level, from the Frosty opinion, Forge is a cosmic level threat. He just is. He can create objects quickly that emit black holes, which means we can take out something like a solar system fairly effectively, right? So that's that. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. He's not in a lot, right? Well, I mean, he's in a lot, but you don't see the focus. You see that the really only times we see Forge focused on is we see him a little bit focused on in Dawn of X, and we see him with Storm. Outside of that, there's nothing. There's almost nothing, like really adding all that meat to Forge, even though he's in like everything, right? So where is he? For the love of God. According to Scopely, this is trash. They didn't even try, okay? They gave a very baseline of half of his power. The sorcery is important. It's not going to be in Marvel Strike Force, whatever, but he's dressed as his native tribe. He has this background, and he has this sorcery kind of bit. Does it, or could it contribute to his technical powers? Absolutely, right? So we don't see that. We don't get any of his background. Even this thing where it's like, oh, he's making cybernetic limbs. He's not doing that for fun, right? He has cybernetic limbs. It doesn't even point it out, right? So I think, somebody was just like, oh, I watched X-Men, or I watched one of the X-Men shows, or I played a game and I saw Forge that one time. This is who he is. And they wrote it completely from memory. It didn't look anything up, and that's what it is. And yes, so they didn't even try. I'm sorry. It is what it is. So that was Frosty Features Forge. I hope that you had a good time. Please let me know in the comments if I got anything wrong. If there's any your favorite Forge moments, I would love to hear them. What you think about the power level, or other ways I can beat the crap out of Greg. As a reminder, I stream every week at the link above on Twitch. Sundays, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, where we do Frosty Features live. I hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. Most importantly, y'all, stay cool.